Hello, very good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Dan Walker and Louise Minchin.
The headlines for you at 6 o'clock this morning. More confusion for travellers as the EU prepares to relax restrictions for vaccinated British tourists.
Excavation work begins at a cafe in Gloucester in the search for a suspected victim of serial killer Fred West.
Chelsea get their revenge over Leicester City after their FA Cup defeat at the weekend, celebrating the victory, with fans finally returning to Premier League stadiums.
Join us on a drive down memory lane and a road trip through British motoring history as we show you some of our most extraordinary, ordinary cars.
Good morning from the Tower of London, where later we'll be revealing the name of the female Raven chick. The Tower opens for the first time today after lockdown at 10 o'clock to a lot of fanfare. The weather hopefully will have improved here by then, the rain clearing the southeast. Then we'll have sunshine and showers. A lot of the showers will be heavy and thundery in the east. I'll have all the details coming up.
Good morning. On Wednesday, the 19th of May, the top story this morning is the EU could soon relax travel rules for vaccinated British tourists, though Boris Johnson says holidays in most European countries are still out of bounds.
EU ministers are meeting to discuss the proposals today, but it comes as the government faces criticism for mixed messaging over whether people can travel to countries on the so-called amber list. Our correspondent John Donnison has the story.
Let's face it. Who isn't ready for a little bit of this? Portugal, the only EU country on the green list, finally welcomed back British tourists this week. But what about the rest of Europe, much of which is rated amber? The government has been accused of sending out confusing messages.
The government should crack down and tell people once and for all if it's safe or not, particularly for leisure travel, so the summer holiday. And right from the very beginning, we think they should have been clear. If they said that amber means stop rather than prepare to go, that should have been clear from the beginning, and it's not. And I think people are very confused.
We don't want to stop.
It comes after the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, said it was OK to travel to countries on the amber list to see family or friends. Only for the Prime Minister visiting a vaccination centre a few hours later to contradict him, saying he was clear amber countries were not places people should be going on holiday yet. The travel industry is calling for clarity.
Government ministers are clearly confused themselves at the moment, and that breeds through to consumers who will be confused if the government doesn't know what the message is. But fundamentally, the Prime Minister has delivered on what he said he would deliver in February this year when he announced his roadmap. He said that in May, overseas travel would start. So that's to be welcomed. I think the problem is now we've got government infighting leading to this mixed messaging.
All this as the EU is expected to sign off on a plan at their end to allow fully vaccinated Britons to fly to Europe without having to take a COVID test or quarantine. Meanwhile, surge testing is being stepped up in COVID hotspots, where there are concerns about the new Indian variant. These include Bolton, Blackburn, Bedford and now Nuneaton.
How are you doing, sir? How are you feeling?
For the moment, though, Boris Johnson says there's no evidence to suggest the government will have to deviate from the roadmap to fully ease restrictions on social contact by June the 21st. But he said ministers would let people know in a few days' time, once the data was clearer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
John Donnison, BBC News.
Well, the Prime Minister is expected to face questions from MPs later today over the confusion around those international travel rules. Let's get a bit of information from our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming. Adam, good morning to you. So the Prime Minister under pressure to provide some clarity on this one, isn't he?
Well, there's basically three areas of confusion now about international travel. Number one, there's just what you've got to do if you do go abroad and the number of forms and different tests and things you've got to do for different countries. Number two, there's the fact that our green list in the UK, it's not reciprocated elsewhere and it's not reciprocated in the other direction either. So while today you might hear lots of headlines about European countries opening up to British people, well, Portugal is still the only EU country that British people can go go to on holiday or to visit family and then come back from and not have to quarantine. That doesn't apply to any other European countries. And then the third thing is just this confusion from the government about should you or should you not go to amber countries. So the next one's on the list. We've got the official advice says you should not travel to them. That's what it says on the website. But then you get some ministers saying, oh, you could go to them if you wanted to see your friends and family. Then you've got other ministers saying going to amber countries is dangerous. So there's a lot to think about. But this is what happens when you move from a very simple rule like stay at home, do not travel, to a more complicated system where you've got 3 different kinds of countries and all sorts of different interpretations of what essential travel actually is.
OK, so we've got that going on, and also the government is coming under a bit of criticism for its handling of the pandemic this morning as well.
Yes, so the National Audit Office, who basically scrutinise how money is spent by government departments, have done a report today about the lessons learned from the pandemic. There's not much new stuff in there because it pulls together all the 17 other reports they've done into the pandemic. But it's all about, as I said, learning the big lessons. And there's a few big lessons that they say the government should do. You should maybe have what they call playbooks for other major emergencies or major incidents, which aren't very likely to happen. But if they do happen, they could have big consequences. They also say you just need to be much more transparent about how you're spending money, how you're awarding contracts in an emergency, and also what you're trying to achieve. And they also say that there are going to be big impacts long term, particularly when it comes to spending on the health service, when it comes to catching up with missed schooling, and also just local authorities who tend not to get a lot of attention in this crisis. There could be big questions about how they're funded in the next few years too.
OK, quite a bit to digest this morning. Adam, thank you very much for that.
Excavation work will begin at a cafe in Gloucester later today as police search for the suspected victim of the serial killer Fred West.
15-year-old Mary Bastone worked at the cafe before she went missing more than 50 years ago.
Let's get more from our reporter Andrew Plant, who is there for us again this morning. Andrew, what's happening? What's happened overnight and what happens today?
Good morning to you. Yes, after more than a week of initial searches at this cafe right in the centre of Gloucester here, police say they do now have enough evidence to start an excavation of the basement here, and that really centres on 3 new pieces of evidence. Number one is this piece of blue cloth that we've heard so much about, which was photographed in the corner of the cellar here, and we know that Mary was wearing a blue coat and carrying a blue bag when she disappeared from Gloucester back in 1968. Number two is what they called yesterday structural anomalies. They said yesterday that was 6 voids that they've discovered in the floor and the walls here, which they want to investigate. And number 3 is a dog which is trained to sniff out human remains that they took down there a few days ago, and which did, they say, have a reaction when it was in the cellar. Now, they've been in touch with Mary's family throughout this process. They've said, of course, they can't guarantee that they will find Mary's remains in that cellar, but what they can do is answer the question definitively one way or another about whether or not she was buried there after she vanished back in 1968. Last seen actually at a bus stop not very far away from where we're standing right now on a very cold January night back in 1968, just 15 years old when she disappeared. But it was really 25 years later when Fred West's crimes came to light that he was connected with her, and people started to wonder whether or not he had been responsible for her disappearance. At that time, there was really not enough evidence to warrant a search of this cafe, but now police say they have got that. They will start excavations today. It won't be a quick process, of course. It's underground and it is a fairly small space. They say they will have forensic archaeologists initially on site today, but finally the possibility of answering that question of exactly what happened to Mary more than 50 years ago.
Andrew Plant, thank you very much, and we'll come back to you a little bit later, but thank you.
Now, urgent action needs to be taken to make electric cars more affordable if the government is to hit its 2030 target for banning the sale of all new petrol and diesel cars. This is according to a group of MPs.
The Public Accounts Committee says ministers have a mountain to climb if they want to achieve their ambitious target. Here's our Chief Environment Correspondent, Justin Rowlett.
Sales of electric vehicles are by far the fastest growing segment of the car market, but they still only account for 11% of new car registrations. Getting to 100% is going to be tough, MPs warned today. The government plans to ban the sale of new petrol and diesel cars from 2030, with hybrids prohibited from 2035. Motorists won't be ready to make that change, say the MPs on the Public Accounts Committee, unless the price of electric vehicles is reduced significantly and charging infrastructure is installed much more quickly.
as well as the cars themselves being expensive, with only a handful being under £30,000, there's the cost of charging them. While electric charging is cheaper than petrol and diesel, there's a big difference between charging in public places and charging on your driveway. And lots of people don't have space to charge their vehicles at home. So the infrastructure and the cost of that has got to be thought about as well. And we're concerned that the government's behind the curve if it's going to meet its target.
The Public Accounts Committee says the government needs to do more to develop the skilled workforce and electric power infrastructure needed to support the transition. But the government told the BBC today it was on track to meet its targets and says it is investing £2.8 billion to help the car industry and drivers make the switch to electric. Justin Rolat, BBC News.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.